All right. Welcome to another edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. Today, we are super excited to be with our guest, Boots Riley. Make sure that you do all the basic things and like the video, share it, subscribe to the channel. If you like what we do, support us on Patreon or by clicking the join button. All that stuff helps this video reach more people and us connect with new audience and listeners. So much appreciated. So I'm going to go ahead and get right into the introduction so we can get into the conversation. So, activist, filmmaker, and musician Boots Riley studied film at San Francisco University before rising to prominence as the frontman of hip hop groups The Coup and Street Sweeper Social Club. His debut feature film, Sorry to Bother You, premiered in 2018 at the Sundance Film Festival. We actually had an audio podcast with him back then on the film, which was really great. And so anyways, it had great box office success and widespread acclaim. Boots, of course, for our audience knows that he's an organizer, has spent a life dedicated to social change, was deeply involved in Occupy Oakland movement, and was one of the leaders of the activist group the Young Comrades. His book of lyrics and anecdotes, Tell Homeland Security We Are the Bomb, is out now on Haymarket Press. He is the recipient of the Independent Spirit Awards for Best Feature Film, and many other awards. I also know that just today he got news that I'm a Virgo, which we're going to talk about today. His series was nominated for Best New Scripted Series, Best Lead Performance, Best Supporting Performance, and two nominations for Best Supporting Performance. So welcome to the stage, Boots Riley. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Just one correction, at San Francisco University is probably very different than San Francisco State University, which is where I went. And the faculty there is currently on strike as part of Cal State Systems are having a rolling strike right now. So
yeah, I appreciate the clarification and the mention of that. One of our comrades who was recently on the show, Cesar Che Rodriguez, had just mentioned that the other day. He's faculty at SF State, and we have multiple of guests on the show that are a part of that strike right now. So,
cool.
Solidarity to all of them. So, yeah, I mean, speaking on that same topic, you've been kind of one of the loudest voices describing what we're seeing in the U.S. labor movement in the past couple of years as a strike wave. What do you think makes this, strike wave and labor upsurge special in your mind? I agree in sort of there's this increased interest in unionization. There's more strikes going on. It can be just about wages and benefits, right? Which was good. We support that.
Mm-hmm.
But you seem to think that there's something a little more special in the organizing and militancy you're seeing. So I just wanted to start there.
Yeah, well, we are seeing people, we're seeing it as not only an outgrowth of people wanting material change, which is, I think, like the basis of what most folks listening to this are fighting for, but not only wanting individual material change, but we're seeing it as an outgrowth of the last bunch of decades of movements trying to figure out how do we do something, so I got radicalized in the 80s, and at a time when basically what radical movements were, besides aside from a few things I luckily came of age and became involved in, was spectacle. It was protesting a thing, right? Saying we don't like this. We want it to go away. We want things to be different. And I think it was, and I believe that was an outgrowth of how things had been for the past couple decades since the new left. And a lot of frustration came out of that, going into like the WTO protests in the late 90s. What was that, 99 maybe? And then the anti-war protests of, anti-Iraq war protests, which, found millions of people in the street saying, hell no, we don't want any war. And so, and I definitely had been part of things in which, folks would be like, hey, well, what is this going to do? Even through the 90s, like, okay, we're going to go protest police brutality. What is it going to do? And I think, for lack of a better answer, we gave a wrong answer, which was, we don't know, but, let your voice be heard, right? Letting your voice be heard is, and I won't say it's wrong, but it obfuscates how power works, right? Because yes, we need our voice to be heard. We need to communicate with each other and tell each other things that we think. But the idea of, quote unquote, speaking truth to power, as if that power cares what the truth is, right? As if the more voices saying something, we can shame folks into it. And I think that's, and again, I'm leaving out some really good exceptions to that, right? But that was kind of what things were seen as. And I think we started to see a change in the idea of what power responds to. That is not a new thing. It was just people becoming clearer on how capitalism works, right? And and so, for instance, we saw a difference between, you go forward to the Occupy movement, and you had Occupy Wall Street, which was very different than what was going on in Occupy Oakland for the most part, from everything that I can tell. I was only involved in Occupy Oakland, but I knew people involved in Occupy Wall Street. And Occupy Wall Street was like, hey, we're going to occupy this place and bring attention to the fact that it's the 99% against the 1%. And there are all these travesties happening. Now, that was a step toward closer to a class analysis.
Right.
It had nothing to do with function or anything like that. But and we saw that happening, going on all over the country. But in Oakland, what happened was actual people that were radicals said, okay, we see that going on. We're going to start something here. And so it was started, and I wasn't part of that, but it was started with the intent of radicalizing that whole thing, which is why you ended up having stuff like a call for a general strike, which wasn't a true general strike, but 50,000 people came out, we shut down the ports. We started seeing this connection of the idea of withholding labor from to larger societal change, and so that started growing, and so you fast forward, skipping over a lot of stuff, a lot of people organizing fast food and changing what that actually means and what you'd have to do, like even to actually organize fast food, you'd have to break Taft-Hartley laws to actually do it, where there were some forces organizing fast food that knew that they were never going to break the Taft-Hartley laws and just saw it as sort of an organizing thing to raise awareness so that they could elect people to change certain policies or whatever. But there were other more militant folks like IWW connected things happening in the Midwest around that sandwich place, where they started saying, okay, no, we got to be able to have solidarity strikes, which is breaking the Taft-Hartley laws. So you start seeing some of these things turn into a better understanding of how power works under capitalism. Now, fast forward to 2020, and during Black Lives Matter, there were whole like restaurants of workers walking out saying, with only the goal of, we don't want to serve police for free. Stop that, And that happened in several places around the Midwest. So that is something that is seeing, is not only using that power, but broadcasting that power to other people, right? We saw things like the Boeing workers who, when they went on strike, one of their demands was that it was at a time when the idea was that respirators were needed, that they wanted to stop making airplane engines and make respirators for people. So these are those sorts of things. You have other, and you have other work stoppages, such as teachers in Chicago, LA, and Oakland, which not only, did they strike for wages, but they struck and won, common goods thing. So in Oakland, with the common goods wins that they got during the strike, by staying out on strike, was services for homeless kids. We have a lot of homeless people in Oakland, and a lot of, homeless kids. So services for them and services for their families as well.
Mm-hmm.
But separately from that, the teachers won the ability for parents and teachers to have a democratic say over what large swaths of the budget are. And they did that in LA as well, and I believe Chicago. So we're seeing labor look to changing policy and the way things are. You can look to the WGA strike as well with that, right? So often what's told to us is that technology just, is inevitable, like the way
Mm-hmm.
that it works. The way that technology works is inevitable. We have no say over it. Hey, here goes these computers, and they're going to look at everything you do and keep track of it. You can complain about it, and that's about it. And I think, a lot of people put themselves on the line, not only for for their own economic benefit, which would be actually, that is a militant thing, but expanding from there and saying, we don't like that this is happening in the world, and we're maybe the only ones that can do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And even in those sorts of, so we're seeing, and with that strike, not only that, you saw solidarity from Teamsters, solidarity from IATSE, solidarity from all sorts of other factors that didn't exist, that the folks that wasn't in this industry in 2007, but everybody that was there were like, this wasn't happening back then. That people were, other unions were crossing picket lines, this and that. That was nowhere in sight. Now, people kind of had different feelings about it, like, hey, come on, you guys are striking, we should do, and there's all sorts of talks between, there were some writers that led talks between writers, directors, and IATSE members, and just to understand what, each side was fighting for, and to declare some unity in both fights, because IATSE is going to have something coming up this next year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing that radical unity happening, and it's interesting. It's coming up just out of necessity, right? Like people trying to figure out, well, what's the most effective way to fight? Not even out of the, and it's leading folks to these ideas that have to do with working class unity.
Right on. IATSE is that like production assistance and things like that? Like,
no, it's the crew of film crew. Yeah.
Film crew. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Film crew. It's also stage crew, all that kind of stuff.
Right on. So this, continuing on this, I want to also think about Palestine right now. I know that this is something that you've been involved in different ways over the years, and obviously, um, there's a lot of calls, a lot of organizing going on. You've been involved in some, some statements and things like that. I'm sure you've been doing a lot more, behind the scenes and stuff like that as well. Um, the other day, United Auto Workers, which obviously just got done with its own very significant strike, made the step of calling for a ceasefire, which is a pretty big deal to have a union of that kind of size and membership,
Yeah.
making that kind of call. What do you think
And
about that?
further than
Yeah, go
that,
ahead.
they have I may state it wrong, but made a working committee to investigate divestment and boycott, divestment, and they use some other word, so I'm going to say it wrong, but to investigate that and what their connection is with that, and made the connection to what they did during South African apartheid. So
Yeah. So I was just going to ask, like, what do you think are some ways, as we think about, you know, getting more effective in how we organize, thinking about the things that labor can do in turn, unions can do in terms of this kind of struggle. What are some ways you think about, uh that people, and also people who are not in unions, right, but are looking to take
yeah.
meaningful action, that can maybe combat or, uh you know cause some kind of material impact on, whether it's the US military industrial complex, whether it's Biden, whether it's, other forces that are pushing this war.
I mean, so there's what could happen and there's where we're at, right? uh and I'm not claiming to know exactly where we're at, but I know that there's a big difference with that, right? Obviously, if, for instance, uh every port said we're not letting anything in and out from Israel, uh, or and everything, the manufacturers of the workers that were manufacturing bombs stopped doing, there, all of that is within the imagination, and that is something that, were the working class organized, that would be a way to put a big damper on that slaughter. Uh, and sometimes, obviously in my work, I talk about things like general strikes and things like that. Sometimes on social media it kind of gets thrown out there like a slogan, right?
Right.
General strike now. Well, like, how, what does that actually mean? So one of the that we have to be working on these things. We have to be working on regular wage struggles, regular, on the job, conditions, and with a radical purview, with a radical vision being talked about as we organize these things, so that when situations like this happen, we are ready. Now, sometimes situations like this are some of the things that get workers more radicalized, but even with that, you need radicals around to help organize it. Even like a lot of people would agree that one of the most militant uh unions around is the ILWU, right? The longshoremen in
Right.
specifically in the Bay Area. They shut down they were pivotal during South African apartheid, the struggle against that. They've shut down things for police brutality campaigns, things like that. But even I know a lot of them. Matter of fact, E-Rock, who used to be the other rapper in the Coup, is a longshoreman. So through him, I know people, and through other work, even they are like, why do you keep asking us to do stuff? Right? Why aren't you organizing these other workers to do stuff? Right?
Hmm.
And that comes from, and that some of that is actually real. They have a point. But some of that has to do with the fact that that shows you that even in the most militant union there still has to be organizing and daily work that happens. You're not going to just all of a sudden be like, this thing needs to happen. Let me make a good case to you about it. It's involving people in struggles and all of these and getting them to see their power and getting them to see themselves as an agent of change, right? And that's a big step. And I think that's I think we have a huge opportunity right now to meld that with this struggle against the atrocities going on in Gaza. But I think what's happening is, so many people are getting burnt out from just calling for it to end, and you start feeling helpless, and that's kind of what happens, right? Because hey, as much as I know how power works, you do give it a shot. Like maybe maybe the U.S. will tell Israel to stop if we could, like we're on the verge of a full blown genocide. Let's try that. Okay, fine. That blows people out because you end up, begging people to do stuff, and you end up also broadcasting a different view of how things work, right? Like I was talking about. But everybody's looking for a way to actually have some say in it, to actually have some change. And I think this new labor movement that's starting is a thing that people could, can look to as a possibility. If people can see how it could work, they might be more interested in using the withholding of labor for radical goals.
Do you think that there's any kind of and I don't ask this because our podcast is called Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, because actually that's just sort of a joke based on all those headlines years ago that say millennials are killing cars or whatever. But
Mm.
do you think there's any kind of generational aspect to kind of some of the shift around labor? Because there's new unions, sometimes there's independent unions that are cropping up. Like I'm thinking about like Starbucks, for example, or
Mhm.
Amazon, and then you now though see like with UAW, right, that like they had a major shift in leadership,
Yeah.
a year or so ago. And so I'm curious if you think what you think about the dynamics of that as far as you're seeing. Like, is it that, like you say, I mean, I know there's a lot of folks that came up and were involved in Occupy, were involved in Black Lives Matter, and as you kind of said, like they realize like we've done a lot of different types of organizing and protest and so on, but we haven't seen any kind of material change related to these things in
Yeah.
terms of producing the world we want to see. So I'm curious what you think about that aspect of it.
Yeah, well, I definitely think things change. One, the Red Scare did a job, and it is, and what happened from that, even the way that folks that were radicals approached things, right? Red Scare happened. No social media, everything is being told to you that this is the way the world thinks. So even radicals in the 60s approached it in the sense that thinking that everybody agreed with uh, uh, mainstream media as far as radical ideas. So even when it was being put out, it was kind of, it was put out in a very specific way that avoided saying certain things, avoided uh, uh, putting forward class struggle in certain senses, but even to the point where myself, even being in my 20s, I have family members that are like, you sure you want to call yourself a communist? But my everyday world, even in the 80s, was never like, like I never really, I never really encountered anti-communism. I only encountered people being like, really, but how does that get me paid? That sort of
Right.
thing, right? It never was, people knew, when I was a teenager, what people knew was, okay, communism, that's the thing that the government doesn't like. Maybe it's good, that sort of thing, right?
Right.
So I never had any inhibitions around that just due to my experiences. But older folks, kind of had a different experience with that. So, and I think the further we get away from that, right? So even then, people would be like, oh, but there's the Soviet Union, they've got bread lines, what's that, that sort of thing. The further we
Right.
get away from that constant barrage that we were getting, like, you know, um, 2 years before I joined a communist party, my favorite movie was Red Dawn, right?
Right.
And I had arguments with my father about, like, hey, what if the Russians do invade?
Right.
We got to be ready, right? So the, those things were, out there. And so I think that's part of it. The further we get away from that, to that economically things have been getting really fucked up, and we have been sold, they repackaged and sold the 60s to us in various forms, right? As, whether it's the civil rights movement, whether it's, hippies, whether it's and that kind of got sold to us as, here's the way you do things. And so I think it caused people to question a little bit more, because there was this certain kind of rebellion that was sold to us. So I think people are a little bit more open, uh, due to reaction to that. But also, I also, you can, it's not just generational. It's not just being farther away from that. There are radicals that have been organized.
For
There are
sure.
radicals that have been pushing things out there, that have been doing things, and I think um, that's kind of where we are. I think a lot of those radicals aren't in parties, aren't in larger organizations, and we see. And then I think also where we are is some of the problems with where we are as a result of you know um, that sort of situation. But yeah, definitely I think younger people are more radical, but I think you can talk about actual material reasons are more radical in general. I would say, though, also, and this has been like the standpoint in all of my art from the beginning, is that if you talk about radical ideas, if you talk about what communism actually means, if you talk about what socialism means, most people agree with it.
Right.
Like most people, like, sorry about the movie Sorry to Bother You. Uh, most people didn't have a problem with the politics. They had a problem with the horse dicks or whatever, or didn't like the structure of it, that sort of thing. But very few people, it's just the basic shit. So I think that what we're also seeing is that, you know, uh, the boomer generation, Generation X, uh, as well, just wouldn't use the same words. And and has maybe believes in these things, but doesn't believe in the viability of the movements that could get to those things. And I think just because the difference in the number,
Yeah.
we're there's more acceptance that these are places in a movement we could get to. You know, with the strike wave thing that was happening, there's an old there's an old radical longshoreman, retired, who's still kind of very involved, and I was telling them about, hey, there's a strike wave going on, and he's rather involved. He hadn't heard anything about it. And it was like mystifying to him that it was happening, that there were all these thousands of strikes happening. And you know, and he couldn't put his finger on how did it get from this point to that point, right? And,
Interesting.
you know, and I think some of that is what's has to do with media. One reason I like paydayreport.com is that they track a lot of these strikes. There's also, I think there's a Columbia University site that does that. But the idea that we know that strikes are going on is something that is what makes it seem makes these sorts of movements seem more possible to us.
Right on. You had a recent interview with Alex Press for Jacobin, and you talked about, like, you know, how many filters there are in trying to get radical politics into Hollywood through the writing process. You were kind of talking about the writer's strike, and then, you know, that it would radicalize writers, but that, you know, you didn't know whether that would necessarily translate to more radical writing because, you know, it's difficult to get radical writing through. And if you want your job and you're thinking just about your career, then you're probably not going to focus on writing the more radical stuff. And so, your quote was, if your main thing is trying to make a living from writing, then you're not going to get those politics through. And it, you know, it made me think when
Maybe that's cynical, but I think and please try, but I think that the point that I'm making is that for me, art has always been second, right? It's been you know, and you know, unfortunately, at times, also business has been second or third or fourth or whatever, and I haven't made smart decisions in those cases. But they're the decisions that kept me going, right? And you know, and it's and I think it's also what makes me inventive, because my goal is not to get a thing done. My goal is to get this thing done, right? And because there's certain reasons and all of that, and I think it's really it takes a lot of artists are already insecure.
Mhm.
A lot of humans are, and so if you've got a lot of people telling you that you're fucking things up if you fight for this one thing, it starts being hard to figure out what you do fight for, what you don't fight for. And if you don't have if you don't have a movement to fall back on, if you don't have, you know, people to look to, or you know, anything like that, then you lose yourself. And especially if it's like, I got to stay in this, I got to stay in this game, you'll lose it very quickly, you know, right away. And it'll be like this series of you know, little chips at your thing. And you know what? That can happen whether it's about politics, whether it's about some sort of particular art style or anything like that. Because it's also hard, because as an artist, you do want to listen to what other people think and how it works. You know, you don't, I don't at least want to just create something in a vacuum. And so I am actually very collaborative. Um, but yeah, I I think, you know, having something that I look to that's bigger than myself is the thing that is able to keep me doing it. But it doesn't have to be politics. There's this joke. Um, what do you call a bass player without a girlfriend?
I don't know.
Homeless, right? Because and there's a lot of truth to that in the sense that, you know, somebody wants to make their music so much they're not focusing on the business of it. Sometimes they're not focusing on whether this is going to be, you know, take them to this other place. They're doing, you know, they want to make their music. In film, that doesn't exist as much because, look, by, you know, the writers that are being hired often have gone to film school, or they've gone to some sort of creative writing program. They've gone to, and when they were in that film school or creative writing program, they were promising their parents that they were going to make a living, right? And so the choices that they make, and look, we don't only see this in writing, we see this in movement politics as well.
Absolutely.
The reason why so many people get jobs with nonprofits that have constricting politics are because they have some radical ideas often, but how do I get a job with these radical ideas, right?
Yeah.
And you
That
know,
was
so
my experience.
yeah.
It was. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, getting out of college and like I started working in the nonprofit, you know, world because it was like, oh, I could get a job, I can get benefits, you know, and this is what my family was telling me to do, you know. And so it took me 15 years to really just realize how small this had made my politics, you know,
Yeah.
and try to figure out a way to do something different, you know. But it's yeah, it's not easy. I mean, I guess one of the questions that I wanted to ask about that, you know, is like I think that you know, when we interviewed you about Sorry to Bother You, our question was like, how did this movie get made? And you had a story about, you know, like how you did it and how you kind
Mhm.
of you know, got support for it among people and got it together and pushed it through. And you know, now you have this other series, I'm a Virgo, which is excellent. If people haven't watched it, please do. I think it's great. Um, and you know, so and this came out on Amazon, right? So you also had to again, I mean, that wouldn't matter. I mean, any of these you know, studios or big corporations that are going to put out your work,
Yeah.
you're working within a capitalist system. So I'm not trying to say that in a specific
Mhm.
thing with them, but I'm just saying like you are navigating getting these politics. And in some ways, I mean, there we'll talk about this I think a little bit later, but there's certain aspects where I'm a Virgo. At certain points, I think the politics are even more explicit or more explicitly stated, rather, maybe. Um, but I think that you know you're not just in these movies and in this series. You're not just also. It's not just a politics of complaint or a politics of criticism of capitalism, and because we see that in other places, but it's also really thinking about making art that grapples with how do we actually build power and respond to these things. And so yeah, I'm just interested in your own experiences with trying to keep your politics in command of those projects, like you know, navigating that, and anything that you would offer to younger creatives that are inspired to do something similar, you know.
Yeah. Um, okay. I you know, I think for me, some of the more directness with the politics in it um was actually an artistic choice almost. Like, you know, because I'm
Yeah.
also always looking at how to uh I discovered a long time ago. Like I didn't think until maybe my third album that I was an artist. Like before that, I was just like, I'm doing this thing to do that. But I discovered that um I I need to be passionately intertwined with the art of something. I need to feel like I'm uh, progressing art to feel connected to it. That's just what, you know, I've come up in, and that's how I feel connected to it aesthetically. And so, and I feel like if I feel connected to it, then that's my best way to know that other people will feel connected to it. That's my only way that I can really know, right? So that leads me to figuring out how to push boundaries artistically, right? And the thing you're not supposed to do is have a character turn to the camera and say, this is the way it is, right?
Right. Right.
And and you know, I don't think I don't know, I feel like that's not what I do in any of my other art. You know, I think there's something else to it. And with my grandmother having been run theater companies here, and then me having been involved in theater again, like black box theater was like the last thing that I, you know, like if personally I see that and it makes me feel like being a kid that's bored in this thing and people arguing with each other, right?
Right.
And so I like went toward the thing I'm not supposed to do, and that was more of an artistic thing, like how do I do that? And it's not just doing it, but make it feel like something. How do I like repulse people and make them also come back in, right? Like
Hmm.
not repulse, but take you out of things. Like you are
Yeah.
hello, you're watching something, and now you're going to get back into it, right? And so there's you know, I wanted to figure out if I could do that. So to me, that felt exciting because it felt like a risk. It felt scary because of that as well. And so that's where some of that, like directly saying it, kind of came from. It also came from a need of like, I need the story to move along. And I think if I move the story along and just have these things happen, but people don't understand why Jones would call for a general strike. You know, they don't understand why. They just understand that she did it because that's what radicals do. And I didn't
Right.
want that, right? And
Yeah.
and so that's where that kind of power came from, like from that need. Uh, but I think I lost what the question
Well,
was.
I'm gonna come back to it because I want to continue on this point for just a minute because I was at a screening of Sorry to Bother You in 2018, and it was in Philly here, and somebody asked you a question about um I can't remember, but it came down to this discussion of like show don't tell, right? Which is like this thing. I think it comes out of the Iowa Writers Workshop or whatever.
Mm.
And I remember the person in the crowd saying, "Do you know that the CIA spent a bunch of money like funding that
Yeah.
concept, right?" And I think your response was, well, just because they funded it doesn't mean that we don't necessarily know why. They might have thought that it was a very effective mode of getting their message across to do sort of for folks who don't know, it means you like show through the story rather than tell like coming out and explicitly saying it. And yet this is an example, I think, in some ways within of these little vignettes within the series where there is just like, no, I'm going to stop and tell you. And I agree. I mean, I think I had written in the question initially that I showed them to my teenager because I was like, this is like TikTok in some ways. Like these are like
Mhm.
these, but they're very captivating,
Mhm.
and so these short, 3-5 minute segments where Jones, really lays something out very well. Who's for folks who don't know, she's an organizer, rent strikes and so on. And another one is the hero has a rant about all art is propaganda, right? Which of course,
Mhm.
you know, um, and so I love these little segments, but it made me think back to that screening, and you kind of was
Yeah.
Sorry to Bother You thinking about showing rather than telling, and then here you're kind of playing with that a little bit.
Yeah, I don't remember the question or the answer
Sure.
to it. But I would say that, yeah, one, we know that certain styles were pushed by the CIA. You know, we know that you know, um, a lot of stuff that came out at the of the MoMA in the 50s was stuff that they funded and pushed. Jackson Pollock. We know that Paris Review um, was ran by two CIA agents that were in so deep that they didn't even know each other were CIA agents. Um, and the idea behind that, they even published some radicals in Paris Review, and in the other, there were some other magazines around the world that people were involved in that came out of that same collective and funded by the CIA. And their whole thing was, we can let all of these ideas out as long as and you could talk about, you know, these ideas in relationship to the United States, because they didn't feel like the movement was big enough to do anything. But you can't talk about, you can't support any revolutions that actually happened. Right. And that was the thing. And so it made it seem, you know, passe for anybody in the, for writers. And, you know, like, it's not because of the Red Scares, because it's passe for writers in the 50s and 60s to celebrate anything that happened in the Soviet Union or in China or anything like that. Was, you know, that was the goal. Right. So they did push certain styles and certain things because, and that was a big win for them, to make it seem, to have a group of intellectuals, you know, basically start taking on the mode that anytime there's a revolution, everything about it is bad. Right. And that's kind of, that we see that to this day, actually, right now, you know,
Yeah,
and
sure.
you know, to where if you say something good about any state that the US is against, then that means you're supporting anything bad that they've ever done. Right.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's we could talk about it in the context of Palestine, right? Of like, you know, you
Yeah.
can call for a ceasefire, but as soon as you start to say, I actually support them to resist, then, you know, it's
Yeah.
you support this and that and this and that, right? And yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the second part of that question earlier though was like, just thoughts for folks who are trying to navigate
Uh,
this, of like, they are radicals, they're in an organization, etc., but they're interested in making art and trying to get it made. And you know, you've been through this I mean, obviously
yeah.
musically before the film stuff too, so
Well, here's the thing. Um, when I started rapping, I knew I wasn't good. I started, you know, I only started rapping because I had a friend who I was trying to get to come to police brutality rallies and stuff. And he was a rapper. And I lied to him. I said, there's going to be a lot of people there and you can rap. You can rap something against the police. And, you know, he was like, I'm only rapping if you're going to be my hype man. And I was Julius T. Poet. And I started being his hype man and asking him how he raps, how he thinks of stuff. Right. And then I realized, you know, I realized like, wow, I could do a lot with it. And I realized I wasn't good. And I knew the battles that I would have. I knew the silent um, gatekeepers that would close the gates at certain points. And I knew that the thing I had to do was be good, not just be okay. I had to get good. And so and having self criticism, all of that. So one, you got to have something that's undeniable. And how do you do that? And it took me a while. Like, I even, you know, some people like my first album, it's something that's hard for me to listen to, right? um and but even to get to that point was a lot of work. So, and what does good mean? Who knows? But um the way that you hone yourself is through repetition, and that repetition can't be you looking at something and just, you know, maybe sending it to a friend or whatever, because also those friends aren't reading your script, you know, like a lot of them aren't. They're busy, they're doing stuff. I think one thing that you got to do is figure out ways to see your work in action. And this, what I'm calling for here is, one, you got to start you got to start making little videos, you know, writing short scenes, writing things. And look, nobody wants to look at them. Let's be honest. So you got to figure out what is that exciting thing that's going to be on this video that's going to make it work. You're going to end up developing a style. I think this is, and this is even if you're already writing for someone, or whatever, you got a job in a writer's room or whatever. I think you need repetition of having people react to your work to see what's working, what's good. And for me, like what I used to do is I would take my music. Well, obviously we would also hand it out to people in cars and see how they reacted, or drive up with the music playing in a friend system with the car and see if anybody react. But I also go to like whatever the Best Buy was of the time and put my music in and go in the other aisle and see if anybody reacted at all. Like all sorts of ways to you got to get in there. You got the reason why Sorry to Bother You was able to do what it did is because I was new to film, but I wasn't new to art, and I was new, and I had a process of it. 10 pages into Sorry to Bother You, I was bugging people, like having friends read the script, all that kind of stuff, and because I was so used to that sort of thing, like 30 pages in, I somehow got Oliver Stone's people to read the script and write things, and that was my first thing. One of his assistants wrote, "Oh, he's good at dialogue," and I was like, "What? I'm good at dialogue?" So, I think that. So you got to start with that. 2, you got to start. Well, you got to know what you want to happen with that work. What is your goal? Just enlightenment? Is your goal just to be like, I'm letting you see this? What do you want it to cause people to do? Right? And who knows whether that, but that's how I can gauge whether it's successful. I want people to join organizations, join campaigns. I want to set up a worldview that makes people want to make that choice. Right? So that's my goal. And so that's how I'm thinking about my work, and whether it's effective, and it gives all these things. Right. And, and that's how I can critique it as well. So you have to have that, because that is going to give you a thing that everybody doesn't have. There's going to be a lot of people writing to kind of catch up right now, which is some of it because they're inspired by the way the world is right now. They're inspired by the movements, and that is good, and that's natural. You have people that at least got a little bit more radical, like during the minor strikes of the 80s. You had pop stars like Billy Bragg that got politicized by going out to the strikes and then started writing slightly more radical stuff, right? So you had that, and that's honest, right? But then you're also going to have people to be like, producers being like, this is the kind of thing we need. This is where people are at. Can you write me something like this? Right. And it's going to ring hollow. It's also going to be that something like this is going to have all these other, bourgeois ideas in it. It's going to, you had that happening in the 70s, where, a radical was represented by Meathead in All in the Family or something like that. Or, the plenty of, like Good Times characters where somebody's supposed to be like they're in the Panthers. It's just this cartoon, right? So one, establish the fact that you're going to make art no matter what, and you're going to figure out how to get it out there, even if you have to take your video on tour with you and a friend in a car, and you set up gigs all around the country. If you figure out that you're going to do some version of it, then the things that you're doing end up becoming a train that people have to choose to get on or or let pass by. And that makes it something different. That
Mm-hmm.
that builds an excitement about it. But you're not even going to, you've got to figure out how people are reacting to your stuff. It's a little hard doing it just on social media because people press like or whatever, or they don't, and you don't know what people are doing. You got to get where you can see people's faces, see how it's happening, and that takes another level of organizing and effort just on that side of it. This is not, obviously, I should have prefaced this by saying I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. This is just
You have some
what
experience though, for
what
sure. Yeah.
what I'm saying. But there's new ways people can do it. So you make your thing something that you're going to make happen, whether it's a $1,000 version of it, a $5,000 version of it, 100,000. And for Sorry to Bother You, I had all of those ready. Like, I mean, Sorry to Bother You, I think probably the version that came out in McSweeney's, we had like 100 Equisapiens coming down the street, flipping over cars, and using bats, smashing in windows, and all that kind of stuff. And it got to and that was probably like a $15 million version at least, probably. And we're like, and it was like, Boots, we're only gonna get 3 or 4 million for this. What do we do? And then I was like, okay, he gets hit on the head and we only see it through a slit, right? And that saved all that money, right? And so, but the point is that you figuring out that you're going to do it, and I think if you come from a if you are connected to radical movements, not just have radical ideas. So that's one thing I would say is connect yourself to a radical movement, get involved in that, see how these things are doing, see how what makes people want to do things. A lot of what my work has been influenced by is, doing door-to-door campaigns with radical ideas, or selling a radical newspaper, or things like that. And understand, and I have a difference with some people that are my friends that make art where it's like anger, you got blah, 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 blah. Obviously, maybe there's a place for that. But what I realized, even before all that music came out, was that people didn't mobilize for that. They mobilized when they thought there was a way to win.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying you can't have anger fused with that, but if it's just anger, it feels like there's no optimism in it, and there's no way to win. And so your art will be affected by being involved with actual winnable campaigns, with a radical viewpoint, with a radical vision, and you'll understand those. You'll start learning those things through your interactions with people, and your community, and so that changes not just how effective it is, but it changes how people are affected in the moment when they see your art, and it becomes something new. And so then you can do $1,000 version of your movie, a $5,000 version of your movie, and have it connect with people and bring it to people and learn how to do those things. And I think we need more of that because, like all the, politics aside, all the big rappers and artists that we know right now, they're actually, they're 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 there because of all the people selling their music out of their trunks, all the people that are just, going to the open mics, doing that. And I think with film, we don't necessarily have that in that same way. It's very isolated, and uh, if you can, there could be a movement made with film, but it needs to be more connected to communities. And so I think more your question was, once you get to the level where you've got funding on a in this big way, and you're fighting over these things. Now, let's say this: in every movie, every piece of art that has that amount of money, you're talking, $1 million or more, or something like that. You're probably going to have people that have money that have opinions about it, and you're going to have to deal with that. And some of those opinions have nothing to do necessarily with the politics directly,
Mm-hmm.
And so that is part of, the working together and figuring it out. And for me, having done music for a long time, having in the past, you said I'm an organizer. I'm not, in the past I have been, but,
Right.
Having had that experience, you learn how to, and I'm not the best at it, but you still learn certain things about how to work with people, how to give people, some agency in things, and have them buy into your thing, right? Because that, I probably used this last time I was talking. It's like stone soup, right? You get everybody to put their thing in, and you're making something together, right?
Mm-hmm.
It still, somebody is leading it. You're the leader, but you're getting people to put things in, and if you didn't just pop up out of nowhere, I don't know how you could pop up out of nowhere and have something that does all the things you want it to do. But if you're not just popping up, maybe it can happen. But if you're not just popping up out of nowhere, you've by now built a bunch of stuff up to where whoever's getting involved with you knows the deal.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one of my favorite things in both Sorry to Bother You and I'm a Virgo is the organizers in, whether that's Jones or Squeeze, and these, I mean, you can tell that, I didn't mean to call you a current organizer, but I know
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you've been in parties and I know that you've
yeah,
organized. Um, and you have those experiences, right? And these are real characters that you're able to, I'm sure they're composites and whatnot, but you drawing on experiences as well as, your own, I'm sure, ideas of what you want to get across in terms of things that don't work so well and things that you think, have a better chance of making change. And so I appreciate that
yeah.
in both pieces. I'm gonna pull up. We have a couple of audience questions, so I'm gonna pull up a couple of them.
Okay.
Um, First of all, shout out to Eric for supporting the channel. Um, so this question was about organizing. So thinking about cultural workers, artists, and craft people effectively organizing, is there any instances of artists organizing that you can historically point to? Let's see,
Well,
this might be connected movements that have been successful. I mean, yeah, go ahead. I mean, I kind of know where you're going to go, I think.
yeah, I'm not the best person to answer that question because I'm also looking for those answers. But obviously, we just had an example: WGA, SAG, striking. doing these things. But in order to even create the even in order to create, sorry, not WGA, but SAG, that was a specific thing that happened in and of itself. You had, because you had this larger communist movement happening, you had folks like Charlie Chaplin, who, was influenced by that. And I don't remember whether he was in the Communist Party or not, but he definitely was a communist. And, then they did a strike, but obviously they weren't able to, it wouldn't have worked in that case if it wasn't these bigger actors, that had been seeing themselves as connected to this larger movement that was going on around the world, and told the studios they weren't going to do it. So I would say this, like, had there not been these revolutions going around the world, in this, in the 20s in the United States, there, according to Seeing Red, the documentary, I forget her name, but there were 1 million card-carrying communists in the 20s, and that was the milieu that all of that happened in, right? So I would say one general answer is that what cultural workers are, that movements becoming more radical in general across the working class are going to open up spaces for cultural workers to be able to do things like that. So, for instance, right now, if we talked about a music, an effective, musicians union, a recording artists union, or something like that, you'd need, just strategically, you need all these big artists to start off by, and withhold their releases. It would have to be the ones that are the biggest ones coming out, and there'd have to be that. It wouldn't be as simple as that, but that's only going to happen once we're at this other level, and that has to do with just the, just the way the industry is made. But I would say WGA and SAG are some examples of cultural workers, and I think you're asking about cultural workers organizing for their own sustenance, right? Because there's thousands of them, with cultural workers organizing to help out other campaigns. But WGA and SAG, I think, are right now, this strike and the gains that have gotten, at least for the WGA, I think will inspire a lot of artists to figure out how to do this.
Right on. And I mean, there's also this effort I saw recently, and there's been a couple of efforts around this, but around like streaming services. And I think this is an interesting thing within like the music world of, like, Spotify and Tidal. It's like, I know that the amount of money that artists get from this is like, basically next to nothing. And so I know that there's efforts underway in that. Yeah. And I mean, I guess, the question is sort of whether, do you think there's something specific about artists that makes them harder to get into organizations?
Well, we're petty bourgeois, right? Not necessarily in our tastes or, who we want to align with, but just the material situation is one in which people, and so I'm saying that, like, in the sense that people are like thought of as their own private contractors, right? And they're not necessarily always working with other ones. And the places where artists are working with other artists are the ones that are getting unionized. Even the VFX artists right now are unionizing. And but people are in their own individual places, and so I think that's a big part of it, and which is why there would have to be, like, new things figured out, because all those same problems have existed for like, even, you know, we talked about longshoremen. Longshoremen were thought of as not being able to be organized because it was high turnover. People could get work for one day and get fired, then somebody else. And then there's different docks, different, you know, piers all over the place. And, you know, they, you know, the ship could pull into a different place, you know, all of that was happening. So it was thought of as that same wave, and they figured out how to do it. And they, you know, it had to be more militant, you know. You had a similar thing, similar problem with Lyft and Uber drivers. And you had a situation and where people are like, well, how would you ever know? Right. And so it makes it hard. But what so I think an example though of why it has to get more, how you can do it with it getting more militant. And this is just one little fight. Taxi drivers in Paris didn't want Lyft or Uber to be able to get a license to do it. And they said, okay, they're not, after this date, no Uber is driving, because I think they only had Uber. No Uber is driving. And everybody was wondering how they were going to do it. And they were effective. They won whatever that was. I don't know what's happened since then, but what they did was they just looked for any car where there was an adult in the back seat and nobody in the passenger seat. And they, with their cabs, they went and blocked the car, reached in and grabbed the keys and threw it out, even if it was on the freeway. Right. And famously, Courtney Love was one of the people in the back of one of those cars. And apparently, you know, this is what a driver told me, so I don't know, but apparently tweeted out that she was now having to walk on the side of the freeway because this happened to her.
Wow. So somebody else asked about, you know, cooperatives, cooperation, communalist movement, gave the example of cooperation in Jackson in Mississippi, and whether you could see potential for that kind of thinking in the realm of the arts.
Well, so right now there are a number of folks, partly because of the struggle that happened with the strike, trying to figure out how to do collective studios and collective film studios, to be clear. And I'm not. Matter of fact, I actually am on the board of one that Lily Wachowski is doing, and there's different setups, you know, to do it. I think it could be cool. I don't think it's an answer for, you know, the whole way the industry is set up. You know, and the questions remain about you still have to get funding, you know, and I think it's basically a way for pay to be a little bit more fair. And I think that can be good, but I don't think that's the answer, you know, in the same way that I don't think, you know, getting a group of people to move to a quote unquote better neighborhood helps solve the problems of the neighborhood, right?
Right.
And so we still have to look at the big ones, but cooperation, Jackson, you know, folks that I really respect. And I think there's something that folks are doing, which is about making a model. But I think and it's good for that to be happening, but, you know, making a prefigurative model or whatever, it's good for that to be happening. But I don't even know if the question is whether or not it can work or not. I think, you know, there are people that do that, but when people are saying, could that even work? I don't necessarily think most of them are asking that in good faith. You know, I think, you know, we know it can work. And I think the difference is, how do we fight to transform all of society? And, you know, that question exists even when you have a revolution in one country. right?
Right.
Because the rest of the capitalist world is fighting to defeat that country, and and nobody else is free. So, um, um, so those are questions. I think it's something that if it can help a group of folks, then I look at it as a reform that's good for now. But let's make sure that we're still putting in effort into organizing to get rid of the whole system.
Right on. I wanted to ask you one more I'm a Virgo question, which is, in it, there's like a little bit of there's a tactical, or maybe it's even a strategic kind of debate, dialogue that's going on between different characters in the film. And, there's the example of Jones, who's really looking at, collective organizing, rent strikes, labor strikes, general strikes, really trying to, you know, to organize mass groups of people towards these kind of politics. And then there's also this dialogue around like kind of secretive stuff. Like, there's the whole thing with, Cootie, the main character, like being kind of kept secret for his whole, childhood and growing up. And then there's this critique, obviously, of like doing these actions that may even have a material idea behind them, but that can be kind of quickly undone and criminalized as well. And so I was just interested in kind of some of the things that you're thinking through there. I mean, obviously, it's kind of
Hmm.
stated through the film, but if you had any commentary on that
Yeah, I mean, um, that
through the series.
either,
Sorry, not the
yeah,
film.
yeah. I guess yeah, it's pretty much right there. It's more that we and that in a certain way was just talking about this sort of great, quote unquote, great man idea, right? Of like
Hmm. Hmm.
um doing this thing that is symbolic and that maybe has some limited material change, and connecting that to the same idea of reforming capitalism, right? And how those are similar ideas, but one gets the cover of seem aesthetically being revolutionary, right? But also, and it for some, this is like, okay, whatever, we talked about that enough in our lives. But the the thing is, we're often talking, and not so much now, so I'll say this, but people in my generation often talking about Che and Fidel, without realizing that they wouldn't have been able to have they didn't just come in on the boat and make that revolution, because that happened, but there were general strikes happening. There was organizing happening by the working class of Cuba that was able to destabilize, the ruling class there, and that the Cuba wouldn't have been ready for revolution, nor would they have been able to have one without all of that happening. And often that's looked at as this totally different thing that was happening. But if you're stepping back and looking at history, it's part of why it all happened, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, right on. Appreciate that. Just lifting this up to folks, Boots said it, join an organization, join campaigns. And obviously that's one of the reasons that you said that you make art. It's one of the reasons that we do what we do as well. And so hope folks that are listening to this get involved in something like that. And yeah, I mean, I'll stay on for a couple seconds. If anybody has any other questions, I want to thank you so much for taking this time talking to us. Definitely want to encourage people to go watch I'm a Virgo. If you have not, go watch Sorry to Bother You again. Um, Congratulations on the accolades and everything that it is getting. It is well deserved. Do you know at all if there's going to be a season 2? I mean, there's like some speculation out there, and I was
Uh,
curious.
we don't know, and actually, some of the answers to that last question of what that discussion was actually about actually had to do with stuff at the that was supposed to be at the end of the season, at the end of the that got cut out and kicked to a theoretical season 2, but we don't know yet. So
Yeah.
I am making other stuff. No matter what, I'll be shooting stuff next year. So
Yeah, I heard. I think you're going to do a pick a bigger weapon project, possibly. No.
uh, there is something that is inspired by a song
Okay.
on
Okay.
Pick a
Okay.
Bigger Weapon. So I'll say
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Okay. All right.
yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you everybody for coming through, and Boots, thank you so much. I know that you're extremely busy, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and just share your work and your thoughts with us.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Thanks for having me. All
Thank
right.
you.
Cool. Peace.
All right.